Come here, boy. Show me how you people play chess in the slums. The words came sharp and arrogant from Mrs. Victoria Whitman, echoing through the golden-lit living room of her Beverly Hills mansion. Her tone dripped with the kind of superiority only someone born into wealth could carry. 17-year-old Diego Santos froze for a moment, his hands still holding the tray of appetizers he had been helping his mother, Carmen, pass around. It was supposed to be a charity dinner event where rich politicians, businessmen, and their jeweled wives came together to pretend they cared about the poor. But to Victoria, it was also an opportunity to turn Carmen's son into the night's entertainment. The guests chuckled behind their glasses of champagne, finding amusement in Victoria's cruelty. I bet he doesn't even know the night moves in an L shape. Mr. Hamilton, owner of a string of luxury hotels, whispered loudly enough for others to hear. Laughter rippled through the room, smooth and sharp, like knives cutting at pride. Carmen, who had worked in that house for 20 years, lowered her gaze. Her grip tightened on the silver tray until her knuckles whitened. She had scrubbed floors, polished silver, and sacrificed everything to raise her boy. And now she had to watch as the woman she once saw grow from a spoiled child into a ruthless socialite mocked him in front of strangers. "Carmen," Victoria said sweetly, her words soaked in false kindness, "you may stop serving. I want you to watch your son play. It'll be educational for both of you." Diego didn't move right away. He let silence do the talking, scanning the faces around the room. At 17, he had already learned that quietness often revealed more than words ever could, and what he saw in that moment was a room full of powerful people who thought they already knew his worth. But his stillness unsettled them. There was something in his calm eyes, something in the way his fingers twitched slightly as if arranging invisible chess pieces that made a few guests stop laughing. "Of course, Mrs. Whitman," Diego finally said. His voice was steady, almost a calm. Some of the guests exchanged quick, curious glances. Victoria leaned back into her leather chair like a queen preparing for sport. "Excellent. I doubt you've ever touched a board like this. Genuine Italian marble. Each piece worth more than, well, let's just say, more than you could ever imagine." A state representative sitting by the window frowned. "Victoria, don't you think this might be a little cruel? The poor boy is bound to lose." "Nonsense," Victoria shot back, adjusting her diamond earrings with a smug smile. "It'll be a story he can tell his friends that he played chess in a mansion. That's more than most of his kind will ever do." What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the boy they pitied had spent the last 8 years studying the game with relentless passion, while his classmates wasted hours on video games. Diego lived inside libraries, devouring every chess book he could find. On an old, battered computer he'd repaired himself, he studied legendary matches late into the night. Kasparov, Fischer, Carlsen, he knew their games by heart. He had memorized over 200 openings and 50 defenses, his mind sharper than anyone in that room dared to imagine. Tonight, Victoria wasn't just about to face a maid's son. She was about to face a boy who had turned discipline and brilliance into quiet power. Victoria began setting the white pieces with exaggerated movements, as though she was starring in her own play. "I always play white. Family tradition," she declared, ignoring the fact that serious games decide color by draw. Diego said nothing, simply aligning his black pieces with meticulous care, each one perfectly centered on its square. The precision in his touch made Mr. Hamilton narrow his eyes. "Let's make this fun," Victoria said, raising her voice for everyone to hear. "If the boy manages to surprise me even once, I'll donate $1,000 to some public school or another." The guests chuckled again, their laughter hiding a nervousness they couldn't quite explain, because deep down, they were beginning to sense that this might not go the way Victoria expected. Laughter spread through the room once again. But this time, Diego lifted his head and smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile that warmed hearts, it was sharp, controlled, and never reached his eyes. Carmen froze. She knew that look all too well. It was the same expression her son wore as a little boy, when classmates doubted him in school contests. The same smile he gave her at 12, when he announced he no longer needed help with math because he had already figured it all out on his own. Victoria made her first move. Pushing a pawn forward to e4, she smiled proudly, as though she were teaching a child. The king's pawn opening. A classic, dear. We learned this at Harvard. Diego didn't hesitate. His fingers pushed a black pawn to c5. The Sicilian defense. The room fell strangely quiet. That wasn't the random push of someone barely familiar with the rules. It was the response of someone who understood chess at its roots. Interesting, murmured Congresswoman Mills, leaning closer to the board. Victoria hesitated a little longer before continuing. 3 seconds. That pause told Diego everything he needed to know. She had memorized openings like lines from a script, but she didn't understand the ideas behind them. She moved her knight to f3, another rehearsed step. While she tried to recall her next sequence, Diego's mind drifted backward. He was 9 when he found a torn chess book tossed into the trash at the library. He had smuggled it home in his backpack, his eyes shining with excitement. "Mijo, why chess?" Carmen had asked, weary from cleaning to shifts. His answer had been simple, almost too heavy for a child. "Because rich kids always say they're smarter than us. I want to prove they're not." Back then, Carmen earned barely enough to survive. There was no extra money for lessons, computers, or even a proper board. But the library had books, dusty and forgotten, and Diego made them his world. Every day after school, he walked miles to study games of grandmasters no one else cared to remember. Victoria finally moved her pawn to d3 safe, timid, predictable, a move that revealed as much about her personality as it did about her chess style. She lived her life the way she played, controlling, cautious, protected by her wealth. Diego replied with his knight to c6, fluid and precise, never taking more than 5 seconds to decide. His confidence was unsettling. "Our little helper is playing too fast," Victoria said with mock amusement, glancing at her guests. "In real chess, you think before you move." For the first time, Diego slowed down. He leaned back, frowned thoughtfully, and after a long pause, slid his pawn to g6. To the untrained eye, it looked impulsive, another sign of impatience. But hidden within that move was the beginning of something far deeper, a strategic storm that would take shape 10 moves later. "Ah, you see." Victoria turned to the guests, smiling triumphantly. "He doesn't think things through. Typical." But Mr. Hamilton stiffened. His memory, rusty from university chess days, suddenly stirred. "Victoria," he muttered, "that boy's setting up a dragon. A fast dragon variation." "A what?" she snapped, irritation breaking through her polished mask. "The Sicilian dragon. It's advanced dangerous." Victoria scoffed, brushing him off. Please, he must have seen it in some movie. But as pieces moved across the board, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Diego wasn't merely reacting to her. He was steering the rhythm, orchestrating the flow like a musician controlling tempo. Every night, every bishop landed exactly where it should, shaping an invisible design only he seemed to see. From the corner, Carmen's chest tightened. She had always known her son was brilliant, but seeing him like this calm, fearless, unshaken was something new. For the first time in her 2 decades of working under Victoria, she saw a flicker of fear in the woman's eyes. Victoria's smirk faltered when Diego deliberately sacrificed a pawn. It seemed like a childish mistake, but Mr. Hamilton nearly choked on his whiskey. "Oh my God. He's setting a trap." "Relax," Victoria replied sharply, her voice edged with unease. "He's just memorized some moves from the internet. This will be over in minutes. But it wasn't ending. Something was building. Then Diego did something none of them expected. He calmly pushed back his chair and walked toward his mother, who stood trembling in the corner, her hands clasped tightly. "Mum," his voice was low, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Do you remember when you told me that one day I'd show them who we really are?" Carmen's throat closed as tears welled in her eyes. Of course she remembered. It was the night of his 15th birthday, when she hadn't even been able to buy a cake. She had cried in their cramped kitchen, and Diego had hugged her and made a promise. And now, in a mansion full of powerful strangers, he was keeping it. "That boy has more dignity than all of us combined," Congresswoman Mills whispered to her husband as she watched the quiet bond between Diego and Carmen. Victoria's jeweled fingers tapped restlessly against the table. "Shall we continue? I have other commitments today." Diego returned to his seat, but he wasn't the same boy who had been mocked at the start of the evening. His posture shifted. His silence, heavy with years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and a determination sharpened by hardship. He was no longer playing just a game. He was carrying his mother's struggles, his childhood battles, and his promise into every move. His next decision was swift and clean. A move so precise it forced Victoria to frown for the first time. She had been cornered: protect the king and lose her queen. Protect the queen and fall to checkmate in 3 moves. That can't be right," Victoria stammered, her eyes darting across the board. For the first time that evening, she was thinking hard, not performing. Hamilton leaned closer, his expression tense. "Victoria, he's dismantling you, and he's doing it without ever stepping foot in a formal chess club." As Victoria wrestled with the board, Diego looked round the room. He noticed how the champagne glasses had stopped clinking. Mills leaned forward, completely absorbed. Hamilton's wife had set aside her fashion magazine. Even the hotel magnate, who had been glued to his phone all night, was now watching him with wide eyes. Carmen recognized the look on her son's face. It was the same one she saw years ago, when he discovered the chess section in the library, when he sat for hours in front of their broken computer studying old matches, when he woke at dawn to practice tactics before school. That same fierce, relentless focus was alive in his eyes now. Victoria finally made a desperate move, hoping to wriggle free of the trap. But Diego had seen it 6 moves ago. He slid his queen into position. "Check," he said softly. The word cracked through the silence like thunder. The room stilled. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as her diamond bracelets jingled. She wasn't afraid, not yet, but she was furious. Furious that the boy she mocked was now making her look small in front of her own circle. "You must have copied that from somewhere," she said, her voice rising an octave. "No one learns that on their own." For the first time, Diego's smile reached his eyes. "You're right, ma'am. I didn't learn it alone. I learned it from Kasparov." Hamilton blinked. "Kasparov taught you?" "Not in person," Diego replied calmly, moving his final piece. "But I studied every one of his documented games. All 1,832 of them. This sequence, he used it against Karpov in the World Championship. 1984, Game 23. Victoria's eyes darted around the room, searching for her usual comfort, admiration, laughter, approval. But all she found was something she had never felt before: disappointment. People weren't impressed by her tonight. They were impressed by the boy she had tried to humiliate. And then Carmen stepped forward. Her voice, steady and filled with truth, cut through the heavy air. "My son woke up every day at 5 in the morning to study before school. He walked 6 miles to the public library because we couldn't afford internet. When I worked double shifts, he solved problems by candlelight because our electricity was cut off. He's not here by luck. He earned this." No one spoke. The silence was suffocating, and in it, several of the guests lowered their eyes in shame. Diego turned back to the board. His queen slid into place like a final brushstroke on a masterpiece. "Checkmate," he whispered. Victoria stared, frozen, as though the pieces might rearrange themselves if she glared hard enough. Her fingers hovered over the toppled king, trembling as they brushed the smooth marble. The silence was so thick the ticking of the $15,000 wall clock could be heard clearly. That was just luck," she muttered. Her voice cracked, stripped of all the arrogance it once carried. He must have memorized that sequence. Hamilton stood abruptly, his eyes still on the board. "Luck, Victoria. He just executed a Sicilian variation. I've never even seen before. I've been playing for 40 years. Congresswoman Mills quietly raised her phone, pressing record as the weight of what had just happened settled over the room. Congresswoman Mills lowered her phone slowly, her sharp instincts as a politician telling her what this moment could mean. A wealthy woman, known for her arrogance, brought low by the very boy she mocked, a story that could spread like wildfire. "I don't accept this," Victoria snapped, rising to her feet so suddenly that several chess pieces toppled across the board. "This isn't right. No one learns to play like that on their own. Someone must have trained him to embarrass me." Diego stayed seated, his calmness only sharpening the sting of her anger. "Would you like a rematch?" he asked evenly. "I can play anyone here, or all of you at once, if you prefer." A wave of murmurs swept through the guests. His words sounded impossible, but after what they had just witnessed, none of them dared to laugh. "You're getting arrogant now," Victoria hissed, her face flushed, her composure slipping. "A boy from the slums has no right to speak to his betters like that." That was when Carmen stepped forward. For the first time in 20 years of serving in that house, she met Victoria's eyes without lowering her own. Her voice was firm, clear, unshaken. "My son is not from the slums, Mrs. Whitman. We are from a working-class neighborhood, and he is not being arrogant. He is being truthful. About his talents, something you clearly struggle to be about yourself." The room grew tense, the air heavy as guests exchanged uneasy looks. They knew they were no longer watching a chess game. This was something much larger. "How dare you speak to me like that?" Victoria spat, her fury barely contained. "Have you forgotten your place in this house?" "No," Carmen said softly, her strength piercing through the silence. "I remembered my worth." Hamilton shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his voice edged with frustration. "Victoria, perhaps it's time to admit what we all saw. The boy is gifted, exceptionally gifted." But Victoria only laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Don't you see? This was planned. Someone trained him just to make a fool of me in my own home." Finally, Diego rose to his feet. His voice was calm but carried a weight that silenced the entire room. "Mrs. Whitman, do you want the truth? I wasn't trained to humiliate you. I spent 8 years studying because I dreamed of playing against people who respected the game. People who understood that talent has no color, no class, no last name. When you invited me to show how I played in the slums, I thought I'd finally be given the chance to earn respect. But now I see. You never wanted a fair match. You only wanted a show of humiliation." Mills, who had stopped recording, leaned forward. Her voice was curious, almost gentle. "How old are you, young man?" 17, Diego replied. "And how long have you been studying seriously?" 8 years. Mills turned her sharp gaze toward Victoria, her tone filled with quiet disbelief. "Victoria, you were just defeated by a self-taught teenager, the son of your employee, someone you invited to play as a joke." The weight of every stare in the room pressed against Victoria. For the first time in her life, those looks weren't admiring, envious, or approving. They were heavy with judgment. I didn't know he was serious about the game," Victoria muttered weakly. Even she could hear how hollow her excuse sounded. Hamilton's patience snapped. His voice rose, filled with irritation. That's not the point. The point is that you assumed he would be easy to beat. Why? Because he's your maid's son. Because he's black. Because he doesn't have money. The silence that followed was suffocating. Diego began gathering the fallen pieces, aligning them back onto the board with the same care he had shown from the very beginning. "Thank you for the game, Mrs. Whitman," he said politely. "It was educational." Then he turned to his mother. "Mum, can we go? I have school tomorrow." Carmen untied her apron and folded it neatly, her chin high. But before leaving, she faced Victoria one last time. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitman, for showing me that my son belongs in far better places than this." As mother and son walked toward the door, Mills called out, her voice filled with urgency. "Diego, would you be interested in scholarships? I know universities that would love to support someone with your brilliance." Diego stopped, and for the first time that evening, a true smile spread across his face. "Yes, ma'am. Very interested." Mills handed him her card. "Call me Monday." Victoria stood frozen, unable to move, watching control slip through her fingers. In less than an hour, she had gone from admired hostess to the woman who had tried to belittle a prodigy and failed. When the door shut behind Carmen and Diego, the guests shifted uncomfortably. One by one, they began to leave, offering curt goodbyes and glances that carried only disappointment. Hamilton was the first to break the silence. "I think it's time I go." Soon the grand room was nearly empty. Victoria remained alone, staring at the board as though the pieces themselves had betrayed her. What she didn't yet realize was that tonight's defeat was only the opening move in a much larger game, one that would shake everything she thought she knew about power, respect, and worth. Under the clear Beverly Hills sky, Diego Santos walked home with his mother, holding in his pocket a simple card that felt heavier than gold. It was more than paper, it was a chance to change everything. Diego didn't just think about chess anymore. He was already planning for something much bigger. He wanted to prove that dignity wasn't measured by wealth, but by character. Half a year later, his life looked nothing like it once did. He was now walking the bright halls of Stanford University, studying engineering on a full scholarship. Congresswoman Mills had kept her word, opening doors that would have been impossible without her help. She had shared his story herself, turning him into a national example of resilience. The video of that night spread like wildfire. Millions of people watched, not because Diego wanted attention, but because the truth had spoken for itself. A headline raced across the internet: "Young prodigy humiliates arrogant millionaire in chess." The reaction was loud and clear. Diego was celebrated as a symbol of brilliance and strength, while Victoria Whitman became the face of entitlement gone wrong. Her world began to crumble quickly. The golf club she once flaunted cut her membership. Charities dropped her name. Even Hamilton, her closest friend, quietly stepped away. His wife, over dinner one evening, admitted, "Victoria has always been arrogant, but to do that to a child? Unforgivable." For Victoria, the sting wasn't just in losing social standing. What cut the deepest was realizing Diego had never wanted revenge. He had simply played the game with quiet mastery, the way he always did. Her downfall was not his doing, but her own prejudice exposed under the spotlight. Meanwhile, Carmen's life was changing too. She was promoted to supervisor at a luxury hotel in Santa Monica, earning triple her old salary with full benefits. It wasn't charity, it was recognition of her worth finally being seen. Diego began giving back almost immediately. He launched a free online chess program linking kids from underprivileged neighborhoods with college mentors. Within 6 months, over 1,000 children were learning not just strategy on the board, but lessons for life. In an interview with CNN, Diego said, "Chess taught me that everyone has unique value. Victoria taught me that sometimes people have to lose everything to understand what truly matters. When asked if he held any bitterness toward Victoria, his calm reply silenced the world. Grudges are pieces that only slow down the game. I'd rather keep moving forward. Victoria sat alone in her mansion, her phone quiet, her invitations gone. Watching that interview with a hollow ache, she realized that what she had lost wasn't just a chess match, it was a chance to grow into a better person. Hamilton's only words to her were sharp but true. You created that moment. Victoria, Diego simply showed the grace you should have. Diego's story spread far beyond Beverly Hills. He became living proof that real nobility is not inherited, but earned in the face of hardship. He turned prejudice into strength, shame into inspiration. Carmen proudly hung a framed photo of him receiving his first award at Stanford beside a certificate from his chess program, symbols of victories no money could buy. For Diego, success was never about destroying someone else. It was about building something so meaningful that others' cruelty could no longer touch him. Victoria tried to make him a joke, but he became an inspiration. And in the end, that was the greatest checkmate of all. If this story moved you, remember, greatness doesn't come from privilege. It comes from turning obstacles into the very fuel that drives you forward.